So hi everyone again. Thank you all for coming and getting started. This is the Women Who Code New York City's chapter event called Own Your Story. And quick who's who for Women Who Code. So my name's Desiree. I use she, her pronouns. We also have Katie and Jesse, who are also the co-hosts and leads. If y'all want to say quickly hi.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
And then we have Christine, who is our speaker today. We're really, really excited to have her. Christine, if you want to say hi, and then we have a few more slides and I'll hand it to you.
Hello, everybody. It's nice to meet you. I know my two business partners are on this too, and they probably also just laughed at that picture of me. But it's good to see all of you. I'm excited to be here. And just a possible forewarning with the weather here, we've lost power a couple times. If I disappear, I promise I'll be back in a couple minutes.
Thanks for introducing yourself. Moving on. So quick high level of our agenda. Times may differ a little bit, but we're currently doing the welcome from Women Who Code. Then we're going to go into a 30 to 45-minute discussion with Christine. Then we'll transition into a 30-minute breakout into breakout rooms where you guys can discuss and work on your stories. You'll understand that more as we go through. And then we'll come back for 15 minutes to ask Christine any questions or discuss what you guys worked on. Now, one thing, just who's Women Who Code for anyone who hasn't been to our events. Our mission is inspiring women to excel in technology careers. And that really means anyone from just starting out intern all the way up to the C-suite and even founders, anyone that's considered tech. And our vision is a world where diverse women are better represented as engineers and tech leaders. One thing that we always like to point out, our code of conduct. So Women Who Code is an inclusive community, and we're very big on ensuring that we're empowering everyone, and we're regardless of any of the isms that you see on this screen. If you do feel like any of that has happened during an event, please feel free to message us directly. We want to make sure that you're feeling comfortable. That's our key here. Now, one thing we like to also point out is there are other events. We are the New York City chapter, but there is Women Who Code Global. So if you'd like to see, events from any other Women Who Code chapter, please go to womenwhocode.com/digital. And here are an example of some of the events that have happened and that are going to be happening. Oh, love that animation. Oh, it's going twice. All right, and then for us specifically, you can see our events at meetup.com/womenwhocode NYC, which I'm sure a lot of you found us from. And currently a few events that we're having a remote hiring event that's going to be in July. There's also going to be a wellness, mental health and wellness series that's going to start in July that Katie and I and a few other leads are going to be working on. Very excited about. And one thing, we have a call for speakers. The deadline is June 30th, and it's for a build and deploy your static site workshop. Please reach out to us if that seems interesting to you. And that is our last one. So I'm going to stop sharing and hand the floor over to you, Christine.
All the faces suddenly, that was neat. So hello, everybody. It's very nice to meet everybody as we sort of do this talk tonight on owning your story, which is so broad. So I'm going to give you a little bit of flavor here, and I'm going to start by telling you a little bit probably of my story or one of my stories or multiple of my stories. So the way I think of owning your story and knowing your story, particularly in this particular venue, we're probably talking about professionally going into an interview. But I have a very strong belief that it starts much earlier, and it really starts with the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. And that so deeply impacts every other piece of our life. But to introduce myself first, which I probably should have done before, I'm Christine. I'm the senior managing partner here at Virago Search. We are a routine search agency in technology and engineering. Our specialty is diversity and inclusion. So we work very hard to place diverse candidates in leadership and high potential leadership positions really across the US. As part of that, we try to do all we can to sort of create opportunities to network, opportunities for really truly diverse candidates to get into a better position as they walk in the door of any room, whether it's an interview room or somewhere else. But I'm going to start by telling my story. Bear with me. So if I go and I'm thinking of an interview, I'm going to tell you guys a fabulous story about myself. I went to Baby Ivy on a close to full scholarship academically, got my master's degree, and then worked my way up in the professional world until I opened this company over the last year, and we've had some really great success, which I think makes me sound awful, but also very impressive. But that's because I'm glossing over all of the other pieces. Like about a year ago, when I started this business with my partners, it was right after we were all laid off. For me, I had been on the job for 4 weeks. And just before that, my contract had ended unceremoniously because I don't play politics well. You guys will get that as we talk more. I'm probably a little bit too candid. There's been so many bumps. I have been in sales and staffing and recruiting companies for the last 15, 16 years. So on Monday, I might be our best producer. And on Tuesday, I'm on a performance improvement plan. And then, I don't know, Wednesday, everybody else got fired. It's been absolutely wild. So the point is, we tell stories to people about who we are all the time. And we forget to touch on all of the different pieces. And we sort of hyper-focus in this one area. And that's a pretty good example. On the one hand, I think I can make myself sound like a LinkedIn article about success. And on the other hand, I think I can sound like a, I don't know, a Time news story about all the difficulties and challenges. But to give you another angle on that story, because I was just talking about professional versus personal. I am a black belt in jujitsu. I'm a green belt in Kung Fu. I was a nationally ranked rower when I was in college, so that makes me sound really sporty and cool too. I also have pulmonary fibrosis in my lungs. I have been in the hospital more times than I could probably count with pneumonia. I had my colon rupture once, so I have a suppressed immune system. My point being, I'm assuming none of you would have guessed that when I'm talking about having a black belt or a green belt or rowing competitively. And that's exactly what we tend to do. And I think everybody does it, but I think, very frankly, I think women in particular struggle with this even more. We compartmentalize all the different pieces of our lives. And then we walk into an interview room or another room to get to know people. And we tell this really watered down, careful, one-dimensional story, again, to show this linear progression of how successful we have been and what potential we have. And it's so damaging and it's so limiting to us as a person, to the interviewer sitting across from us, because now they have no idea who we really are, what qualities we're truly bringing to the table. They have this really one-dimensional story that tells them nothing about us. I should also say I'm a mom. I've got 3 kids. My husband, my life is going to sound so difficult by the end of this. My husband has intractable epilepsy, so we've been dealing with long-term illness on both sides for some time. And I've had to hide that throughout many, many years of my career, because God forbid I said I had 3 kids and my husband had any illness or I had pulmonary fibrosis, no one's going to hire me. And we really get trained into this system where it feels very much like we have to be that one-dimensional person, like our road to success, our road to engagement. It really has to follow a very specific path. And then we're out there and we're suddenly almost lying about that path. And we're erasing all of those bumps, all of those hurdles, all of the failures, all of the wins too, by the way, because every time you get back up from whatever failure, whatever stumble you take, that's a win. You learn something from that because you got back up. But we don't share any of that. We don't share it in interviews. We don't necessarily share it with our colleagues. I don't think we share all of it with our friends. I think sometimes our friends have different levels of friendship and what we're willing to share, and that's okay. But to me, there are so many different facets to our story and so many different facets of who we are and what have gotten us to this point in our lives, in our personal lives, in our careers, that we have to learn to tell that story to ourselves first. if you guys are like me, and I'm going to assume I shouldn't say guys, excuse me, if all you folks are like me, you have gotten very good at different points of actually holding those pieces back. And you have probably either had to meet a group of people or gone into an interview, and gosh, I bet the thing that you were hyper focused on was very likely the thing you struggle with the most that you don't want people to know. And all of a sudden you walk into a room and it's the only thing you could think about. And now you're thinking about that foible or that loss or that stumble, instead of the fact that you got back up and you got yourself back in the door and you got yourself there. And we tend to focus on the wrong things. So when my team and I, and Jamie and Khadijah are some here, they're somewhere out there, Jamie, Rosemary, and Khadijah, if you see them out there, we started this company again after just another kick in the butt, very frankly, that, you know, we worked for a good company. I think we were pretty happy there. Pandemic hit, boom, you know, off we go. And I don't think, had the three of us not known each other, I don't know that any of us would have had the strength or the bravery to go out and start this business and do the things we've done and hit the successes we have. And by the way, the disappointments. But we had each other, and we were able to lean on that. And we were able to tell each other our stories, probably a little hesitant like at first, and over time after the layoff, we didn't immediately plan this business. We were meeting once a week. You know, how are you, you know, checking in? How are you doing with this? What are you thinking of doing? And the conversation just continued to evolve until it was, let's just go do this. Let's just go build this thing. But it absolutely has probably come out of every story we didn't tell, every disappointment that maybe haunted us that we might mention as a joke. But in reality, it's probably also the thing that sometimes you hyper focus on at night and you can't sleep, or the thing you're hyper focusing on before you walk into that interview. I don't know if anybody's ever done this. I have literally talked myself out of jobs beforehand, stressing about the reasons I don't measure up, or I didn't match, or I wasn't going to get this job. And I was, why am I even going? Why am I even going? Luckily, I usually get talked into it by somebody and I go anyway. But that's really why this was so important to me and my team. We want to share this. We want people to start reconceptualizing the way they think about their story. And I don't want to jump right to professionally or an interview. You need to reconceptualize the way you're telling the story to yourself. Because I think that starting point, and those things that we tend to hide, and those things that we think about at night, and the things we think about when we're driving in the car, those are the things that I think really get in our way first. Because then we walk into that interview room, or we walk into that board meeting or that team meeting, carrying all of that baggage of the things we're not telling people, the things we're hiding from ourselves, or the things that they're so affecting us negatively, but God forbid we share it, or we talk about it to get it out. So that's really what I wanted to touch on tonight. And I think particularly, we often have a high contingent of people that have gone through coding camp, or they're in a boot camp now. They're transitioning from one career to another, or from what they thought their career might be to a completely different field. And very often when my team and I interview candidates with that background, people are hesitant to tell their story or the truth of why they've made that shift. And it usually is something significant, because it's a major shift. It's a shift in career. It's a shift in your life. It's a shift in trajectory. It's a major change. And we don't often get the truest answer we can. And frankly, we dig in until we get it. And then we really get to know the person. And then we have this wonderful story that we can actually share with our clients and help make those connections and network for this person and take that next step with them. So that's really what tonight is about. I wanted to touch on these things, and I might be a little bit more interactive than we planned. So I apologize ahead of time if I start pointing and saying, has anybody had this experience? But I'm hoping that what I'm saying is resonating with people, and I'm not outing myself as this crazy anxious person who's always thinking of these negative things. And everybody's like, no, I never do that, Christine, I do wonderfully. But I will tell you very honestly, and I'm going to tell you a part of my true story now. You got aspects, you got the pieces that we give to people. But very frankly, with having my kids, with my husband's epilepsy, with the fibrosis on my lungs, which by the way, no fun during COVID. Ooh, that was terrifying, or has been terrifying. And the amount of work I had to hide that my husband was ill. I often had to hide that I was ill, even though it becomes kind of funny when you keep getting sick. I don't think I've actually told my partners this story. I worked for a company called Modus years ago. And it's where I learned about staffing and recruiting and technology. It's a fancy liberal arts degree behind me back there. Know nothing about technology to start. Philosophy major, political science. But very frankly, I'm working at Modus. So I was a couple of years in, I was doing pretty well. And we had a VP come in. And all of a sudden I found myself with a VP out of Boston, an HR person who flew up from Florida, and my managing director to see if I had a drug problem. Because apparently I would be a high performer and then kind of disappear. You know, I'd get sick for a week and then I'd come back and I wasn't quite myself, and eventually I'd bounce back. And I guess that fits the pattern for somebody who's struggling with drug addiction. And all of a sudden I found myself in this absolutely surreal circumstance of having to go, no. I promise I'm not a drug addict, which I'm sure most people struggling with the drug addiction are going to say. And I had to sit there and suddenly almost outing myself in some way that, no, I have this progressive illness. That was terrible, having to tell these people that I have no relationship with, and I did not know that I had a progressive illness and this was going to keep happening. They were going to probably have to deal with it or find a reason to let me go. And that was really difficult. And then 2008 hit and they let everybody else go. And I found myself in this big 6,000 square foot office all by myself as suddenly the managing director, the salesperson, and the technical recruiter and everything else. So my health didn't necessarily get better. So living that sort of lifestyle and the speed of it and the constant, I'm sure you have all had, I don't want to say Modus recruiters, but the regular, your run-of-the-mill staffing recruiters. It's actually a hard business. Be nice to them. They don't mean to be terrible. They don't mean to send random emails to like the wrong person at all. They're just being held accountable to certain numbers. But I will be very honest, and it was just a handful of years ago now that I found myself in the hospital for probably the 11th or 12th time. Confusing all the doctors because I don't look ill. And then they get a CT scan and they see my lungs and they go, and it scares everybody. And then you have to calm the doctors down and go, no, I'm not dying right now. Later. But I was sitting in that hospital bed with my kids at home, and my consulting business, I was consulting at the time, completely put on hold, wondering why this kept happening. And it kept happening because I was working so much most of the time to hide that I was home taking care of my kids while I was trying to work, and that I had this illness, but my husband had epilepsy. Oh geez, I was hiding everything, and I was playing this game all the time. For the record, wonderful employee. I always had record numbers, great reputation. But if I had slipped a little bit, it all goes away, or that was my feeling. And so I was lying in a hospital bed trying to figure out how to prevent this from happening for the 1,000th time, because my feeling was that progressively it's going to get harder and harder to bounce back. And it was going to get harder and harder to stay out of the hospital bed. And I think I was right. And I quit all of my consulting engagements probably the next week, because I had to make a decision to do what was right for me for the very first time. And I started to put all the different pieces of my story together, because I realized that I was probably living these multiple lives. If I was one person when I was at work, and I was one person when I was at home, and I was one person when I was at a school board meeting, and I was a different person when I was with my friends, and I was just all over the place and exhausted all the time. And I started to shift everything in my life. And that meant quitting those consulting assignments and figuring out what I really wanted to do. And it was super risky, but it's probably the healthiest I've ever been and have been since. And things started to get better. I picked up, really great client, made really good money for a while. And then that went away, and that was okay. And I ended up at this other company, and then promptly got laid off 4 weeks after because the pandemic hit. So that was all interesting. But I will be very honest, I really, truly, deeply believe that if I hadn't made that decision about 5 years ago, I guess it was, I would never have gotten through the pandemic. I would never have been able to open this business. We would not have had some of the successes we've had. We would not have been able to keep going through some of the difficulties and challenges that we've had hit. And I really don't believe I would have been physically healthy enough to get through COVID and the stress and everything else. Gosh, you guys, I can't tell you how many times I was tested for COVID. If you have pulmonary fibrosis, they will just test you at the drop of a hat, and it is not pleasant. But that's really why this became so important to me, because I think for me, it was really, it felt like it was life or death. And I think in some ways it's that way for a lot of people. I think that we struggle through a lot of things. I think we accept things that are unacceptable. I think we contort ourselves into shapes that don't fit us for so long that that's where we live. And that's what we take home with us on a Friday afternoon, right? You can't even relax on a Friday because you just went through Monday through Friday. And then all Sunday you're worried about starting it all over again, right? So I think the start to making things better always starts with sort of really owning who you are completely, not pieces, and putting all of those together and owning who you are and owning that story. So when you do walk into an interview room or you do walk into a new group of people, you like who you are, and you don't have to hide, and you don't have to be careful. You like who you are, and you can represent who that person is cleanly and wholly. Sorry, that was my personal story to share, owning your story. The real piece of this that I wanted everybody to think about, as I told you this, that's the true story. That's what it looks like when I put it all together. You know, not the, I went to a baby Ivy and scholarship, and if I have a business, all that nonsense. The truth is, it was a matter of survival in many ways. And I'm so grateful that I did it, but I want other people to see that they can do those things too. And that so many more of us are struggling with so many of these issues, but we don't talk about it necessarily openly. And we certainly don't necessarily get a chance to talk about it and coach each other on it and talk about different ways to deal with it, because we're all different and we're going to have different ways of actually surviving this fun game of life. What I would like everybody to be thinking about tonight, and the direction I wanted to take this when we go into breakout rooms, is not necessarily how you go in with a resume and how you're attacking an interview and some of those difficult questions, though you certainly can. My focus is really, I want you to start taking that story in the way, and think about what you usually do tell people about why you're shifting, or why you pursued technology, or why you're pursuing the path you're pursuing. Maybe the story of what got you here at this point. And I want you to really throw it and turn it on its head and start thinking of all the different pieces that came into play, whether it was friends or family or your personal needs, or where you were or weren't happy, and start trying to put all of those different pieces together. Jessie was interesting before. She was pointing out a meme that I hadn't seen, what success looks like, right? And it's this trajectory, and it's this straight linear path. But what it really looks like is this nonsense. I can't tell you how many times I've hit the proverbial floor face first and gone, that didn't work. And even lying there for a little while and going, okay, now I'm ready. Now I'm ready to get back up and try something. That to me is so important, because those are all successes too, because you learn something, even if it was just that it hurts when you hit the ground. That's a lesson in and of itself. So tonight, my hope was that as we really talk about this, and as you go into your breakout rooms, am I bouncing between breakout rooms too, or am I just sort of hanging out and chatting with people? I don't know, you guys can tell me after. But I want you to go into these breakout rooms and start thinking of the stories you tell people. But I want you to be thinking of the story you tell yourself, because those thoughts, like I was mentioning, that we have in the car, that we have at night when we're lying down, or those habitual thoughts that, I don't know if anybody's ever suddenly realized that they were thinking about something unpleasant for the last 15 minutes. I can't tell you how many times I've been doing something and I go, my God, I've been thinking about this thing for 15 minutes. I didn't even realize it. My brain wants to be miserable and stressed right now. I want you to think about the stories you tell other people about yourself. But much more importantly, does it match the story you tell yourself? Does it match the way you think of yourself, either professionally or personally or as a person? And if you feel like you can, I would love if you actually share that with your group, because I'm going to assume lots of us have had similar experiences where we do this to ourselves, where we're taking this, I'm going to say external trauma from the workplace, from school, even from our childhood and families, where I think we start to believe the stories people tell us about who we are, what we're good at, what we're not good at. And all of a sudden we carry that into every room with us. My son, my oldest son, he's short for his age, and he never had an issue with it until somebody told him it was a problem. And now he self-identifies as short, and it really bothers him. But it came from somebody else. This was never a problem until somebody told you it was. My partner, Jamie, who's off camera right now, but I can still see your picture, Jamie. There she is, she's waving. Jamie had been told, as I had been told, by the way, at Modus, not on Tuesdays, but on Wednesdays, we weren't good at this. You're not a good recruiter. You don't know this business. You're not good at it. And you sort of carry that with you over time. Even if you are a top producer, even if you can look and say, the way you guys are doing this is unethical or it's wrong. You're telling me I'm not good at it because I'm ethical. That's not good. That's a bad pattern. But I think we all have those. I think we have the patterns and the habituations and the beliefs about ourselves that never came from us, that came from somewhere else. And I want you to really be thinking about that. So I don't know if I'm going too soon, but I would love if we put people in breakout rooms over the next few minutes. But my thought on this is not necessarily what you do when you walk into an interview and how you represent yourself, but that's certainly a piece of it. I want you to really, that juxtaposition of the story you might tell an interviewer or you might tell a colleague, and whether or not it matches up to how you see yourself and the story you tell yourself. Because if the story you're telling yourself is different, nobody is going to listen to the story you're telling, because we pick up on it. Hiring managers pick up on it. Recruiters most certainly pick. Good recruiters most certainly pick up on it. And we know there's something there, and we're not going to dig into your personal life, but we're going to say, I don't know that this person has the confidence to go into this particular environment, right? There's something that's holding them back, and we recognize that. And those are the things that will hold you back. So I guess that would be my direction as you go into these breakout rooms, to sit down and really think about whether the story that's inside your own head about you and what your weaknesses are, or why you might not be a good match for that job, if that matches the story you tell when you do the interview. Because if you're saying one thing and you're really believing something else, it's going to come through. It really, truly does. But if you can start to bring those two together and really start to own that story, including the the face plant on the ground that I've taken several times, the things that we wish weren't there. I wish my lungs were healthy, and sometimes I'm convinced they are. That helps too. But if you can start to bring those stories together, that's gonna come through. You're gonna walk into an interview room and you're gonna do 1,000 times better, and it's gonna give you the confidence and the competence that when somebody says, or excuse me, when you're interviewing and you really don't like the vibe and you don't like the energy and you recognize that this is not a good match for you, it gives you the confidence to say, this is not right for me. And you don't just take the first job offer that hits the table, right? You get to go look and find the right place for you. I don't know if that's a good, clear objective for everybody in breakout rooms. Desiree or Jesse or Katie, if somebody wants to boil that down to be more effective or more executable, that'd be good.
Yeah, of course. And I'd love to just, right before we go into it, since, we do have some time, if there's any, about 5-10 minutes of questions, if anyone would like to ask before we jump in. There was one thing, I loved everything that you were chatting about. I also, to let everyone know, I have some prompts that will show before we go into the breakout rooms.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so before we do that, please, if you have it in the chat, ask some questions. One question, I think you kind of touched on this, but I've noticed that have come up in multiple either events or honestly, even some of my coffee chats that I've had, and it involves kind of around you are a mother who took time off, and I surprising story. I know it's very unique, but there's a lot of this. You're a mother, you've taken time off, and how am I supposed to, own that part of me? It's hard to kind of not only get started and kind of, I guess, go past that mental hurdle of coming back to the workforce, but then also showing people that, hey, I've been out of that workforce, but I've been doing things and I'm still relevant.
Mm-hmm. Particularly in technology, that's very hard. So we do see that. I mentioned we often see breaks too, where somebody actually left their job to go care for a family member who had cancer or some other disease, and they actually either nursed them through or spent those last months with them. I like when people are very honest about it. If they had the opportunity to be able to stay home with their kids and not have to pull themselves in multiple directions, that was a choice. They felt lucky that they had the opportunity to do that. And, they're ready to get back into the workforce. Although on the technical side, I do tell people before they do that, and hopefully if they can reach me sooner rather than later, I do ask them to take some time and put together a couple of packages or a couple of small applications, some small projects they can do with a newer technology so they can show that relevant transition of skills. Because what do we see, right? Somebody has maybe they were working with Angular, maybe they're working with JavaScript and they left. And then they come back and everybody's like, do you have 3 to 4 years of React development? Or now I see more people looking for, is it vanilla? There's like vanilla JavaScript now, which I see periodically on some end, but I like to tell people to actually put something together and be able to show that relevant transition, or be able to talk about it and say, well, this is what I've been looking at on GitHub, or these are some of the languages I've been looking at, and this is what I have done to make sure I can translate those skills. People aren't necessarily looking for you not to have taken time with your kids. They're looking for proof that you can still get in there and still be effective for them. And if you can give them just that little bit to hang their hat on, that, hey, look, I started studying React on my own, or I started looking at Ruby again. That's the kind of thing that somebody goes, okay, this is somebody who's actually developing their career. They're still relevant. They're still interested, and they're paying attention to what's actually happening in their field, even though they're not necessarily actively in it anymore. That little tiny bit is that hook that they still have, because that person, that interviewer, that me, we're generally looking for something to help, because we need that little bit of proof, even if it's not direct proof. If you could get us a dotted line and we can get there and say, hey, she was still interested, and look, she was able to leverage the background here over here. Yes, not in a professional setting, but that shows me this is somebody who actually enjoys what they do and they enjoy technology. But I'm going to be more touchy-feely here and say it's almost more important to recognize that in and of yourself, that you're still relevant and you're still capable and you're still able to do those things. Because that's the difficulty. If you don't believe it and you're not doing anything with it, then you can, I'm going to sound like an awful headhunter. You can promise me all day long that you still have the relevant skills, but you have to show me that you still have that interest, or you still have that piece there. And it's such a little thing to be able to do and say, hey, I looked at this, or I built this small app in React, or this is what I was looking at on GitHub, or this is a class I'd like to take. Not everybody can afford to take those classes, but those are the ways you can show that you're still following what's happening in your field.
That was great. No, I think that really hits it. And especially as someone who hasn't gone through motherhood, it's great to hear that, because I've always been like, I don't know what to say. It's, what do you do? But before we do any more questions, just to like help prep everyone before going to the breakout rooms, as we do some more QA, I'm gonna share my screen on some prompts that you can have. Some of the prompts. So these are some things to get you guys all thinking about, that might help when you're discussing your story and workshopping it with everyone. Now we've got a question in the chat from Jolene. What methods or ways did you use to become only one person and not to be different, or for different groups or situations? And as in, how did you become more genuine in all these situations and still feel emotionally safe? That's a great one. I like that.
Oh, I wish I could give you a really good, concise answer on that. You would, in the movies where somebody has that near-death experience and they're like, oh my gosh, and they come out of it and they're sort of better. Mm-hmm. I mean, it took like 12 for me. It legitimately took a lot of those, and I just physically couldn't do it anymore. I hit this level of exhaustion. This sounds terrible, where I didn't care anymore to waste my time on people that I needed to do that with. Or I came out of the hospital that last time And I get acupuncture often. It's the other thing, by the way, telling our stories. I'm like a woman with giant muscles, and that's always been a thing too. I never wear sleeveless shirts. Now I do. It's cool. But I was telling my acupuncturist, and we were talking about this. This was a few years ago, and she said, "Seems to me that when you're yourself, everything's fine. It's when you play everybody else's game, you seem to get sick." And she said it so offhandedly, and it stuck in my head for weeks because I think I was trying to disprove it. But she was right. It was as I got older, because for a long time I didn't care, right? I was muscular. I did lots of sports. I was who I was, and things worked out. You tell me it wasn't going to work. Okay, whatever. I'll go do it anyway. But then I got married, and then I had a mortgage, and then I had kids, and all of these fears set in. The other fears about who I was didn't bother me as much as that, I watched my brother come out, and he had such a difficult, he actually had a very funny movie-like coming out experience, but all the run up to it was very difficult. He struggled very hard. So he was dealing with such difficult issues that I always felt guilty if I had my own issues. So I would sort of push all those aside all the time. And then all of a sudden there were all those fears of adulthood where things get so hard. I was going into an office, and God forbid I lost my job because then I'd lose my house. It was all fear-based. It was all fear, to talking about being emotionally vulnerable, because that's really what it was. I was afraid of losing my job and failing, or losing my home, or not being a success for my kids, or not winning something. It was just all fear-based. And having somebody who really doesn't know you externally go, "Seems to me that when you do you, you're fine. When you don't do you, you end up in the hospital." And it just stuck so hard in there because it was completely accurate. Every time I tried to be everything that everybody else wanted, other people might get miserable. I've got an issue, and my immune system collapses, and I go down. And it's so messed up. But the happiest I was when I quit my damn job when I got out of the hospital. I think part of me that I was happy in the hospital. I was rested. And people were afraid to bother me with their 8 p.m. emails because I was in the hospital. And that was sick. It's like, I should not be healthier or more relaxed in a hospital bed. This is not okay. 12th, 13th time I've had this realization. So I wish I could give you this great advice, but I think that is something I think it's a different flavor for every person and what gets them to that place. And I think we all have a particular cutoff point where we simply cannot do it anymore, whether it is our sexuality or just being women in and of itself, whether it's professional, whether it's trauma from past jobs or from family. I think we all have a different level of, I'm done, I'm full up with this. So I guess my advice would be, I hope that you would take some of the things that I've talked about so far, some of the things you'll talk about in your breakout rooms, and maybe something will stick in your head, and you write that down and you stick it somewhere so you see it and you get that reminder, because I think you need that consistent reminder of people telling you, even if it's on a piece of paper, that you're fine. And the people that can't handle who you are don't belong necessarily in your life. And you have to start building yourself up and caring more about who you are and how you are than what everybody else thinks, which is so much easier said than done, being an adult with bills and jobs and responsibilities. But the consistency of telling yourself that, I think, is important, that you are who you are, not who somebody else says you are, and start to believe that. This is a very touchy-feely presentation, guys. Sorry. You're coming for resume advice, and I'm like, own your feelings.
Well, honestly, I love that, because I think, what is it? There's this book that I was reading, even though I was a technical project manager. Another coworker of mine suggested The Psychology of Selling. And I mean, that's one of the big things is even if you're not in sales, you're constantly selling either an idea, what the idea of who you are, and a project, a this, a that. And I think that's so important, especially when you're going into interviews. And as you're saying, you got to be 100% behind what you're trying to sell, right?
Yep.
And if you're not 100% behind yourself, how are you going to truly, sell the idea that you can do what you can do? And Kelly actually put something in. So when do I feel most like myself, as a question in the chat? And I think that's a really, and she says that's a really great starting point. I also agree that that's a really great starting point. And when you were saying you're finding that point where you just kind of say, this is it, I just need to be my genuine self. My boyfriend's mother had actually said something similar. She's like, as I got older, I just stopped caring. And that's when everything just suddenly becomes a lot easier.
I feel so old when I say that, but I really want to say I got fed up at some point and I was like, no. But I also realized the person sitting across from me that I was selling something to, I was probably also seeing 5-10% of them. And as funny as it is, the more my personality started to sneak out, you can probably tell I'm a little goofy. I'm not necessarily the sweetest person. The right people respond to that, and all of a sudden they were goofy. And I was blown away because this person that I would get so nervous presenting to or selling to, and we do retained search. We're talking to CTOs and CEOs and CIOs, and most everybody's a PhD holder. We do a lot of AI, machine learning stuff. And you could either get on the phone and be intimidated and go, it's a doctor. Or you can get on the phone and be like, hello, person. What's up with you? Who are you? What are you all about? I swear I'm a good recruiter. That did not just come through at all. I'm like, what do you do? But the more somebody can engage with me and see who I am, so many walls just drop, and you see people's interview demeanor. We video interview everybody. Everybody's got to talk to us face to face. They spend at least like 45 minutes or an hour with us. And it's so funny because you can watch the point they realize that they can actually answer a question and that they can actually be themselves and give you a truthful answer. And it's such a funny thing. Everybody's looking for a full stack developer. And try to get a full stack developer to tell you what their actual preference is, either tech stack wise or front end, back end, but what do you enjoy the most? They're like both equally. It's exactly 50-50. Trying to get somebody to identify what they actually like. And it's because there's not a lot of trust level with the stranger sitting across from them, but we work really hard to sort of make sure we don't have walls, and then they don't have walls. And somebody's like, listen, I really like the algorithms on the back end. It's complex. It's really cool, but I'm better at front end, and then we're like, great. Now I know, and I can tell a better story, and, we can get you paired with a mentor who's going to help you on the back end and help develop your career. So I think a lot of this is, I actually really love Kelly's starting point of when do I feel most myself? Because that is how you're going to get in touch with yourself. But I want you to pair that with the fact that the people that you're getting so nervous about that you're selling something to, you're seeing 10% of them too. They're a real person. They've got issues. They've probably hit the ground and face planted several times themselves. You got no idea what's going on in their daily life. And when you can get to that point that you recognize that person, they've got different issues than you, but they've got issues, then it's a lot better. It's a lot easier to start engaging with them. I used to hyper contextualize what everybody would say. I'd read into it and I'd be like, oh no, she's mad at me. The person didn't know me from a hole in the wall. They're not mad at me. I was reading into it. I was putting all my stuff into this conversation. And at some point I realized that's my baggage, not theirs. Cut it out. And I swear things just got so much easier and so much better. And you get there the more you remind yourself that, no, I'm going to be me today. And that person over there is doing the same thing. They've got their little wall up too. Let me see if I can get through it or over it or around it and actually connect with the person there as opposed to the title, if that makes sense.
That is so good. I'm really enjoying this conversation. We got one more question and then we'll go into breakout rooms. So I do want to say, if it's super helpful, screenshot the breakout room prompts or take a picture if that's helpful. And last question, and I'll talk a little more once I pause the share, the video. Kelly has a question. If Kelly, you want to ask?
Yeah. Hi, Christine. So a lot of the stuff you were talking about reminded me of conversations I had at work too, where this just came up today. Someone mentioned like, yeah, anytime I have like a skip level, I'm always really nervous. I was like, yep, I am too. Why is that? And I realized it's because it's any of these situations where we feel like it is put upon us to be impressive.
Yeah.
So it's like interviews, it's resumes, it's like any of those conversations. So what would be some of your advice? So for the people you have coming through the process, you know they're going to get nervous. What would you tell them to focus on as they're going into any of those conversations?
So it's a funny answer, but this is what has worked for me. And I think it's worked for a number of the people that I've worked with over the last few years. Do you remember I was saying we hyper-focus on the things we don't like about ourselves or that we're worried about? Oh no, I always get tongue-tied in front of a skip level. Oh, I get so nervous and my voice is going to oh, people get short of breath when they're nervous. You probably can't tell this because I talk so much, but I used to get so short of breath and I was like, my lungs. It was not my lungs. I was so anxious. And at some point I was like, you dummy, you're freaking out. And then it went away. But what I usually tell people, when you're going into that conversation, people have a real tendency to play out because we're human. This is how cognition works, right? We focus on the threat and we play out the threat so that we're prepared for it. It's the wrong thing to do. Now you've got a lot. Oops, I told my partners I would not talk about this stuff and like hormones and stuff, but I'm gonna just for a second. But now you've got all of the stress hormones like coursing through your body. Which by the way, shunts blood supply away from your core organs into your arms and legs. And now they're shaking. You're like, why are they shaking? Because you flushed them with blood because you're freaking out. So I tell people, just work on disciplining your mind now, not before the meeting, not right at the meeting, but start doing it now and start, such a silly thing to say, but role play success in your head. Role play the conversation in your head in a really positive light. None of the negative stuff, none of the fears. Well, I won't swear. You play that situation and you kick ASS in that situation. You don't have to play it out in detail. You have to be like, I was awesome. I was on point. I was prepared. I was calm. I did great. I communicated well. He loved it. She loved it. That's what you do. You put all of your energy into that positive place. And then when you walk into the room and people think they're like, that's role playing, it's in your head. No, all those stress hormones, they're not there anymore. Now you have really positive, you've got endorphins, you've got serotonin ripping through your brain. You're feeling good. You're at your best. And then when you get tongue-tied and you go, excuse me, brain fart, and you can keep going and anybody ever make a mistake in a meeting and get tongue-tied and then you're thinking about what you're saying and then you forgot what you were saying? I've done that where I was paying such close attention to everything I said that I would fall apart. And then I started building myself up and I would imagine 5 years ago giving this, you guys, I'd be short of breath. I'd be tongue-tied. I'd be like, what was I talking about? Somebody remind me. So I like to tell people to prep ahead of time, but not in the way they think. Little discipline, hype yourself up, talk really nicely to yourself. And that's what that owning your story is. You don't go in there thinking about all the crap that's going to go bad. You don't go in and be like, last time I met the skip level, I screwed up. You go in being like, hey, this is what it took to get me here. I'm on point. I know what I'm talking about. This is the right way. Here's the other option. I'm going to do great. I'm going to do great. Because at the very least, you've prepped your body physically, you prepped your brain, you got the right chemicals, you go in, and even when you mess up, who cares? You have endorphins flowing through there. So you're like, I messed up. And you keep going and you can move forward as opposed to the terror that our brains are so amazing. They're either the best tool in the world, the most powerful tool, or they're the worst weapons that we can turn against ourselves. And I think when I say own your story, at the end of the day, what I really mean is use your brain as a tool instead of the weapon that when it's on autopilot, oh my gosh, it's the worst. I like to think I'm quite smart. I like to think I'm intellectually gifted. If I don't pay attention to this brain, it's awful. I can come up with the worst situations, absolutely convince myself that that's what's happening. And I swear, sometimes I make it happen. Like oops, look, I broke everything because I was so hyper-focused on it breaking in exactly that way. So I would say prep yourself, mental discipline, and be good to yourself and be kind to yourself and tell yourself all of the good stuff and stop telling yourself the bad stuff. That's what bringing that story all together really is. It's liking the story and going in and being like, yep, skip level, I'm amazing. I'm really confident at what I do and I have a really great idea. That's what it's about.
The TLDR, serotonin.
Huh?
So the TLDR.
Too long didn't read. I'm sorry. Sorry. Serotonin goes through your brain, makes you feel good. Melatonin is serotonin, I think, with like an electron attached to it, which puts you to sleep. But if you have serotonin in your body, you're feeling love and positive and good stuff. It's when you're feeling, probably to your question earlier, most yourself. You're full of serotonin at the time.
I love that. And
you said TLDR. I'm like, got it.
I really love that. And they're bringing it back to the Psychology of Selling book. I swear I didn't mean to promote this, but there is actually one part where they say right before an important meeting or whatever you're doing, whether it's a promotion, a sale, what have you, it's to play it out and do that role playing too, because it just helps get you in that zone. And also throughout the day, saying positive things towards yourself, saying like, even just saying that you like yourself. I like myself. I like myself. It's that same thing of helping trick your brain into having those positive feelings, those positive emotions.
Training your brain.
Exactly. Retraining.
Yeah.
Yes. Positive affirmations.
Yeah. I always say it's rehabituating. I'm trying to, I was talking about being in a funk yesterday and stuff, and I was ridiculous. I was all over the place. I was worried about money. I was worried about my business. I was worried about my marriage for literally no reason. My poor husband. And I'm like, and it was so weird because I could recognize intellectually that I had, I'm sorry, it is too much, but I had PMS and I was being crazy and I was falling into some really bad old habits and I could recognize it intellectually. Now stopping it, that's a whole other issue. And you've got to get really good at recognizing and going, no. And focusing elsewhere and focusing on all the positives. And as silly as it is, that was reminding myself, hey, look at where our business is, look at what we're accomplishing. We just had our anniversary, like we're good, stop it. Over and over. It's like a mental slap to that brain. Whack, stop it. Because we build these up, these permanent synapse connections, neural connections in our brain. If you're always talking badly to yourself, great. You now have a permanent negative connection up there. Start talking positively. It takes time, but you'll counter it. That neural connection will fall away and you've got a new map in your head that says you're pretty freaking good. You know, you can do this and you will do this. And that's sort of how we start laying the groundwork to get there.
I love that. All right. I know we're at 7, we're about at 7. And so I'm going to hit pause on the recording. We'll go into our breakout rooms, then I'll bring the recording back. So, nope, that's not pausing the recording. See, I know that I have a slightly Muppet-like voice and I'm okay with it-ish. But what I was going to say, I'm never a proponent of people sharing things they're not comfortable sharing. You don't do that because you're going to sit in a room and make yourself really uncomfortable. And now all of the nervous stuff is going to come out. What I am a proponent of is trying to identify those things for yourself, those triggers that make you not like yourself, those triggers that make you nervous in a room, those triggers where you're, instead of having the conversation with somebody, you're in your head talking to you about all the bad, like what you just did or what you're going to say next, and now you're not paying attention. Those are the things and those are the pieces I want you to identify ahead of time and be like, and really ask yourself, what is that about? What is that really? Is it my personal life? Is it my professional life? Is it my dating life? Because they're all the same life. And that's the trick, right? Of liking the whole piece and bringing it all together as best you can. And being kind to yourself and actually starting to work on liking who you are, even the difficult parts. And Khadijah, are there things that are hard to like about me? No, she said no. She says no, everybody. I'm easy. But I think that's really, there was a candidate we met the other day who's so good at this. And she blew me away. And this is a developer who was in
robotics, like these great high school programs, and then disappears for 4 years, 5 years, and is waiting tables and is working at some nonprofits. And she brought it up and she said, that 5 years ago was I was struggling with my own mental health and my transition. And this was a woman who had transitioned from a male. And this was something that she volunteered and she was able to own it so well. I don't know where she got that strength and the ability and was able to tell this story. And I would like to hope it's because we make it a little bit safe for people, I hope. But, it's because I like me. But I think 90, 95, 99 to 100% of it was in fact her strength and her ability of coming out on the other side of this story 5 years later, or on the other side of a piece of it, and then almost trying to pick up this next phase of her life. And I thought that was so cool because it's so rare that we see people who are going to say, hey, you see this break here? It wasn't really a break. I chose to take care of myself. This is what I was going through. Here's where I am now. And this is what I want to accomplish and where I want to go. What a cool conversation that was. But most people can't do that. I don't think I could do that. And I've been practicing this for a really long time. But this is clearly somebody that has come to some level of peace with her story. And I think that's really what it is trying to come to peace with who you are and where you're going and what it took to get you there and liking those pieces of your story. I should not monopolize all of this. If you guys have any questions or anything I missed, because I know I hopped out of rooms on a couple of you mid-question. Sorry.
Yeah, and I wrote in the chat, if you have any questions, please feel free to add them. One thing I love to add, as Christine, we were chatting about this as everyone was coming in, and I had stated, like, I've done theater before. And when I bring that up for an interview, because I think it's great, I can say empathy, yada, yada. I kind of just state, I did theater, and I don't go, oh, well, when I first started college, I was a theater and performance major and then realized that that wasn't the path for me. And then I did a double major in something else, but like the theater is still great. Like that kind of is a little stuff we don't really need. What's the meat of that story? It's just that I did theater and I want to go to that next level. And like that was something it's a part of my personality, but I don't need the rest of that story.
That, by the way, is such a great skill set. And just now I'm going to make it all professional. It's such a good skill set to be able to take a complex topic and get that point across to somebody so they get what you're trying to tell them, they get the flavor, but you're keeping that on track, particularly in technology where you're going to be talking to people that don't know anything about technology. You have to be able to tell them why it doesn't work in a way that they can consume and they can understand, and then make them feel better that, yes, you're going to fix this. So good. That's a good skill.
Thank you. And there were a few questions that we didn't get to before. And you kind of already touched on one with the woman that shared her story of transitioning. Are there any other powerful stories that you've heard as a recruiter, or something that was like really unique that some people might not, like they're like, oh, that's not going to be really great. How am I supposed to frame that? But it wowed you. It really stood out.
There was a woman who had, let me try not to be emotional about this. You watched her career trajectory, I can't talk, go up and up and up until boom, and she disappears for 3 or 4 years. And my assumption is almost always that there was an illness or somebody had a baby, something has occurred. Her husband was abusive. And she quite literally had to pick up and disappear. And she had to take her kids. And it was, here I'm coming in years after this had occurred. And he had passed at this point. So now she could pick her life back up. This was somebody who had to stop her life entirely and literally almost disappear. Who then was, by the way, she's, I won't say that, but she ended up getting a position as a business intelligence. I think she was a reports writer and then ended up as an architect and stuff. So she really went the right way. But my Lord, to have to come back after literally disappearing because she was aware that if she did a background or anything else, something would be funny. And she almost had to communicate that so she could go through the background and through these different pieces because her credit just tanked because she disappeared. That's hard to sit in a room and have to tell people that story. And then of course, that stuck with me. And I had to ask permission to share some of those pieces of that story to be able to help her. God, that was really hard. And trying to find the right environment for her as well, where I felt comfortable that there would be the right people around her, where she would be okay coming back and in these challenges. And she was a single mother, of course, at that point. But that was one that just blew me away. I don't think I could ever share something. I don't think I could share that without crying. I just had to brace myself to share that without tearing up. That stuck with me. That was powerful. I had, and this was a young man who shared his also emotional, and I don't necessarily know the backstory, but he ended up walking away himself because he tried to commit suicide. People do share. They do share some very powerful stories, and I'm just always in awe when they can do that. I'm honored that they would tell me that and share that with me, and that they trusted that they would be okay to do that. But I don't know that I would tell them to share that in an interview. And I don't mean to denigrate it or say it's the wrong thing, but a lot of people are scared of that, and they're scared of that authenticity and that honesty. Yeah, so those are a couple of them that have been quite powerful and difficult to shake.
Yeah, and I guess then there's on the other side where not everyone goes through these life
the awful stuff,
other stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so maybe you're sitting there right now, you're like, oh gosh, like I haven't really done much. Maybe I changed a little bit, or I did a little bit of something else. Now, I personally think that there probably is some story there, or there's things that happen in their life that just, maybe they're downgrading, and I think we've touched on.
We all do it. Yep, we all do it.
How, what are some advice you can give for that, or different ways that you can, tactics you can look back on to find those find gems in your story that you can utilize, even if it doesn't seem like there's, those quote unquote powerful moments.
I think that's probably most of what we do as recruiters is asking those, because we generally don't get those stories. We get the story of the next logical step for me. That's why I'm looking. And I think in those situations, I tend to like to get people's motivation for, why don't you want to stay in this exact role for the next 5 years? And asking those questions, is this the exact role I want to be in 10 years? Most people are going to say no. And ask yourself, is this the exact position I want to be in 10 years? Why or why not? That's a starting point, because now you're starting to get in touch with what your motivations are and what your actual drivers are. Money might certainly come into it. I've never seen it be the only factor where somebody's like, I am psyched. I love what I do. I'm so satisfied and content. I'd like a little more money though. I don't see that. We do see, I'm pretty happy. A little more money would be nice. Take a leadership role, and we start to dig in. So I guess my thing is, I do that for people. Ask yourself, where do I want to be here in 2 years, in 5 years, in 10 years, in this exact spot, in this exact position? Why not? I've never met anybody who says yes, not yet. It's been 17, 18 years. So it's getting in touch with what your own motivations are, and then being able to tell the story around it. Maybe you want more creativity. Maybe you want more leadership. Maybe you want to find a mentor to develop certain skills. Maybe you just want a new environment to see if you can challenge yourself. And all of those are not only valid answers, they're good answers. They're good answers. And I think maybe that's the other piece of trying to put a ranking or a value statement to why or why not. You don't need to do that. You are who you are. If you don't want to be in that, you want to look at a new position, that's cool. Be proud of it and own it. And why are you looking for a new position or a change? Because I felt it was time for a new environment, new scenery, new challenges, and new people. I need new. that's okay. That's better than okay. It's a good answer. You're not stagnant. You are a dynamic person looking for some dynamism around you, and that's great. So that's really how I would handle that. It's perfectly valid to just want something new. Gosh, it's positive. As somebody who does not ever want anything new, I'm going to say this terribly. I would never get paid to find that person. That's not who you pay me to find for you. You pay me to find the person that wants to try that new thing or that next thing, or wants to spread their wings a little bit.
I like that. I think that's that's great. I feel like there's definitely been, like, especially if you're trying to leave a role, and it's like that awkward moment where it's not fulfilling you, it's not this, and you don't want to be negative about that, right? You never want to put something down, and instead of pushing something down, you're pushing yourself up and saying, I want to challenge
Yeah,
I want to,
I like that.
uplift myself. We have a question in the chat, but because we like to do this, going to quickly plug, if you haven't already, I highly recommend joining Women Who Codes New York City's Slack channel. Added that in the chat. If you ever have these, we like to have these questions. We have a lot of channels where we can talk more about this and what have you. The women here that are part of it could definitely attest to that. It's always a great time. Now back to the questions. Ange has a question. What affirmations would you suggest for those of us with imposter syndrome? I like that. That's important.
Well, I've never had that. Not 10 minutes before this call started. Oh, gosh. I am Jamie. Would Jamie leave? I get her. She'd be good at this. Yeah, Khadija, let's yell at her tomorrow. Imposter syndrome. It almost depends on the flavor, but part of me wants to say I am enough, but I don't like that one. I like to, pardon my language, I like to prep myself up that I'm pretty kick-ass, that I am really good at what I do, that I do know when something feels right and when it feels wrong, that I do know where I belong and what I deserve. And I don't need to give a quality to it necessarily, because I think that's where we really start talking ourselves out of it. Can I be a VP? Can I really do this? I'm thinking particularly about one of the individuals in the chat rooms. There is that frustration, that difficulty, and that self-doubt. And gosh, we all have it. I don't want it to be specific things that I deserve this job and I get this thing. No, it's I am good. I am worthwhile. I am still trying. I'm getting there, and I am good enough. I deserve good things, and I can go get them. That's what works for me. If I've talked to my partners about this. I don't like goal setting so specifically, because when you set a specific goal of this is the thing that I deserve and want, man, if you fall short, that is catastrophic to you in some psychological way. Or you get it, well, what next? I like positive affirmations to really be very open-ended and very much about me, versus the goal of I am good at what I do, or I'm learning and I am still trying and I'm a fighter. Anything, it depends on what your imposter syndrome, where it's coming from and where your lack of value or where you feel you don't measure up. That's where you prop yourself up. And that's where you talk nicely to yourself and start telling yourself who you are and who you can be. And those two things should eventually become the same, hopefully.
I like that. And one thing that I know that I try to do before you kind of get those worried feelings, or one thing that I've learned is that the feeling that you get when you're anxious and stressed, like anxious about something, they're the same bodily functions that you get when you're excited. And it's really just your brain deciding which way. And that kind of brings back to the idea of how we're kind of rewiring our brain. So I kind of do similar to I guess like a pre-football stance of like kind of jumping on the feet, like, no, I'm really excited about this. So like different affirmations of saying like, no, I'm excited. This is going to be cool. This is going to be great. I'm going to rock it. We're going to do it. And if not, like, it's still cool. Like, I know who you just kind of hit those things where you kind of pump yourself up. And
I'm like also pumping the people around me up, because then I'm feeling like, sorry, Khadija, now my secret's out. That's why I pump you guys up, gets me going too. You get the group around you sort of excited about it. I love that. taking that wiring and flipping it around. So for me, it's often, I have days sometimes where it's call after call after call after call. Some of them are difficult clients, and you could wake up and be like, this is my day today. And that used to be me all the time. And now when I catch myself, I'm like, nope, every single one of those are an opportunity. That's an opportunity. That's an opportunity. You're going to do great. But that's taken a really long time. And now I can say that and be like, yep, I'm good. I'm good right now. But hit rewind in 4 or 5 years ago, I am working really hard to convince myself that it's okay. It's going to be a good day. Imagine a few years ago before this, none of you know this, but there's another speaker here, or you might know this. There's another speaker tonight. She ended up quite ill, so she's not here. Then my power went out. There's all kinds of stuff that went wrong today. That 5 years ago, I'd been like, what are we going to do? Cancel the call. But instead, I'm where I am now. And I was like, well, that's an opportunity. We'll see how it goes. We'll have a real chat with people. We'll have a real talk. It takes time. But man, just be nice to yourself and start it up and you will absolutely get there. It just takes a little bit of time and consistency. Not as long as you think either.
Love that. And I'm using the word love that. I've noticed.
I love you too.
This might, not sure if this will put you on the spot a little bit, but is there any either articles, books, other tools that you've utilized that kind of have helped you? Like I keep plugging this Psychology of Selling book, but it's got great things. Is there anything else that you would suggest or that you love?
What is that book that I want to make fun of Khadijah? Was it Judy Dweck who did the Growth Minded book? I feel like it was Judy Dweck. I'm going to have to send it to you, but there's one book that I actually really like, and it was this woman essentially on this lifelong journey, a psychologist, if I'm correct, doing these studies about neuroplasticity and being growth minded and how we're sort of indoctrinated into this failure/winning mentality, when in reality, everything's a learning experience. Even when you fall flat on your face, man, you learn something from it when you get back up. It's down here in my office somewhere, but I'll send it to you guys. My other thing is actually very open-ended, and I would actually start Googling and look at YouTube videos around neuroplasticity and what that is. Because a lot of the changes actually started to take root for me when I started to understand the science behind it. Because people talk about positive affirmations all the time. They're like, I'm going to manifest success. Are you? And then I read the science behind it and the physics behind it. I'm like, oh, you might be. There's something here. When you start talking about how your brain actually functions and rewiring and rehabituating yourself, that's a real thing. It truly is. So I would look at neuroplasticity. I would look at, I really do think it's Judy Dweck. I gotta look now. I'm so sorry. I'm still talking.
I think it's Carol Dweck.
Carol Dweck.
Yes.
You show off Khadijah. Khadijah's right. She's always right. FYI, Carol Dweck, and she wrote a book on being growth-minded, and it's actually pretty cool. And looking at some of the science of what happens to somebody when they have a winning/failure outlook versus people who have a journey outlook.
Thank you. I know we're very close to time, so just want to pop in again and say if you have any questions, please feel free to add those into the chat. And yeah, we're also gonna grab both of the books that we've said. I'm gonna add those and send those out because I always am there. I have like a little shelf of books right now currently that I need to read. Something else that I wanted to ask. Now we've talked about like what are events and what have you, that, and I think that's really helpful, obviously, in ordering your story. But I think there's another aspect to these events that they're talking about what are you, and one thing that I personally like to bring into interviews and what have you is the kind of like what is something that drives you, what are you passionate about, and how you found those stories, how you found that in stories. And I'd love to hear, is there ways that you've noticed and you found that, like, I do, like, oh, what am I passionate about? I like to be creative. I like to have tangible change, certain things, and then have the story. Would love to hear a little bit on your thoughts on that, and ways on how to find that for someone else who, it's kind of hard to figure out, who am I? What do I do?
So it's so funny because do you remember a few years ago, every article was about like following your passion, stay off of LinkedIn. It'll drive you crazy because you're like, I'm failing at everything. All I kept reading about was following your passion. And to be very frank, if I was following my passion, I would be living on an island somewhere, reading books all day and probably eating cake. And nobody will pay me for it, even though I've tried. What I actually like to ask people, if they look at what they're currently doing, whether it's work or a club or anything else, I don't care what it is you're doing, just think of something you spend a lot of time doing. And I usually ask people something along the lines of, what are you still, like, your worst week? Everything has gone to poop. Everything has gone to heck in a handbasket. What are you still okay to talk about or think about at the end of the day? What is still a positive about your job at the end of the day? Is it the people? Is it the problem solving? Is it the process? Because it's something different for a lot of people. And when you say follow your passions, I'm thinking of eating and traveling and hanging out on the beach and reading books. I'm not thinking about work. If you ask me about my crappiest week ever, I got a few of them. And you say, well, what was so good about it? I've got to think. But when I think, I'm like, you know what? My team was what was so good about it. Or in this instance, Khadija, it's you and Jamie that have still been good with those things. In other instances, it has been, lots of people have different skills in headhunting or recruiting or what it might be. I actually just like connecting people. It's a puzzle to me of being able to, because a manager says, this is what I need. I talk to them like, it's over here. That's what I like doing. I like digging in and figuring out what the actual problem is, and then I can find that person who can fix it. It's something different for everybody. And the way I try to process it is, what am I still okay to tell my friend about? What am I still cool talking to my husband about when he says, how's your day? And I've had a crap day. That's how I have to think about it and conceptualize it. Otherwise, I'm like, don't ask me yet. And sometimes I say, don't ask me yet. Ask me in an hour. And then when I can answer in an hour, that's the thing I'm passionate about. That's what I enjoy. That's what I'm good at. And that's what I'm driven to do. That's just so oversimplification, but it does work most of the time.
I love that. Again, I love that. I think that is really a great way. Honestly, the ways that I found out what I liked was because of being in situations that were stressful and trying to find what are the things that are really good. I know we're about at time, so I do want to say thank you so much, Christine, for obviously being here,
Talking a lot.
and talking. And I want to thank everyone else that's been here, especially those, if you talked throughout in the breakout rooms. And actually, I'm going to stop the recording because thank you all if you're watching this on the recording. And